Yep, welcome everyone to our 202nd Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. We are hosted by the University of Reading and sponsored by Sports Economics Review, the journal in sports economics. And we have in our 202nd session a new presenter. It's an absolute delight to have Sarthak Mondal from the University of Portsmouth, who is going to present. Before he starts, the main thing I think I will say is I am starting to put together presenters for the autumn now, so session starting in September. So if you are interested in presenting, then please do get in touch. And if you have PhD students or other people who might be interested in presenting a paper with a slightly longer time to present than is often afforded in conference sessions, and obviously we run throughout the year as well, so it can be timely for any ongoing research that you've got, then please do let me know. Sarthak, you've got 90 minutes to present in, and are you happy to take questions as we go along, or would you prefer to have bigger questions for the end?
I think probably at the end.
Okay, sure. So
Yeah.
questions for clarification while the talk's going on, and large questions for the Q&A that we have at the end, and we've got plenty of time for that. So, Sarthak, it's all yours.
Thank you. I hope everyone can see my screen because,
Yep.
okay. So today's presentation is basically called The Illusion of Choice, and it's hopefully a critical examination of competitive balance measures, specifically the ones that is related to wind dispersion. Uh, and my co-authors were Dr. Dan Plumley and Professor Rob Wilson, and I should also thank two other people, which is one of them is Professor David Berry, who actually pushed me to get this on very fast, and the other one is Sahin Gupta, who did some of the peer review stuff before we actually sent this off for publication. So I will just start with some of the definitions. So I know people who are on here are more experts than me when it comes to competitive balance, some of them, but I think when I designed the slides, I saw that James puts this up on YouTube, so I thought about the wider audience as well. And if somebody wants to refer back to them later, I just had a defined definition of them. So the foundation of competitive balance lies in North American team sports, and it started with the paper by Rottenberg in 1956 titled The Baseball Players' Labor Market, which was the foundation of the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis. And it is implied differently by different people. So when I ask questions in my class, like to students, what is competitive balance? And some of them will say close competition between the top two league going down to the final day. Some will say new champions every year. And some will say it's very small difference between the best and the worst teams. And whether it is in terms of points or the revenue they generate or the profit they make, and everyone has a different opinion about what it is. But Silva et al. In 2018, in one of their papers, basically simplified the definition, saying that it's the degree of parity within a league and how teams are equal. And does competitive balance matter or does it not? I don't know. It's for us academics, it matters because it gives us analysis to do. And team behaviors are usually restricted by leagues to promote competitive balance so that some teams do not become too strong or too weak. And uh, I know a lot of North American literature is on there in terms of how the draft system is being used, or even how the MLB used the auction system, the sealed auction system. But recently, if you look at it, the Indian Premier League, which does a mega auction every 3 years, where all players, barring a few, are released from their respective teams, and teams have to form a game. So competition in the Indian Premier League is quite close, and new winners or new sets of dominant teams emerge every 3 or 4 years. And financial policies such as salary caps, we have it in India because teams love to operate under that, and it's one of the extension of the North American system. But also revenue sharing. Uh, do they have an impact on competitive balance? Some papers say they have, some papers say they don't, and probably it's dependent on different leagues on how those policies are designed and different underlying factors at play, some of which we probably cannot observe, uh, which basically drives competitive balance in those leagues. So, league structures and competitive balance. So, basically, what is a competition? So, competition can have three types, right? So, it can either be a round robin competition, systems we have in the English Premier League. Each team plays the other home and away once every time. It can be a playoff tournament, knockouts, the FA Cup, or it can be a hybrid format with a blend of both. So, I would say the Major League Soccer is a hybrid format. It's not a pure round robin tournament, and it does have a playoff element, and it can be classified as a mix of both. And the competition can have new teams every season, possible either by addition of new teams or relocation of existing teams, which is quite common in the North American system. New franchises come in, or existing franchises relocate to new locations, or promotion and relegation, which is quite common in the European system. And a league system can have either balanced or unbalanced schedules. So by balanced schedule, I mean you play every other team the same number of times, whether it's once or twice. And by unbalanced schedules, I mean you don't play all the teams the same number of times. And we see that potentially in the Australian Football League, the Aussie Rules football, where they play every team once and they play a selection of six more teams once more. And how that is decided, no one knows. It's just through random lotteries that is decided. Same in the Major League Soccer as well. Sometimes they play every team in the other conference once more. Sometimes they don't play all the teams. So it's decided by the leagues. And how can we measure competitive balance? So competitive balance, it can be measured at the end of a game. So intra-match competitive balance, I think it was popularized some of the work by Nicholas Skelis. So he basically has done some stuff around football on and how to measure competitive balance at the end of a game. So we will not be focusing on that in this paper. Uh, at the end of a season, which is actually one of the most popular ways to measure competitive balance in a sports league, and or between two seasons or multiple seasons. So you take a stretch of 10 seasons and measure competitive balance in that. And some of the common ways to measure competitive balance in terms of the methods that are used within season are standard deviation of win percentages, proportions, points, whatever you call it, the Gini index, the Herfindahl index of competitive balance. There are also a few more measures which were existing in literature, but not all of them have been used consistently or frequently. So there's the index of dissimilarity, which I believe comes from geography. There is the relative entropy and the 5-team index of competitive balance. And there is also between seasons, which you can measure. So you can either use Herfindahl index to measure competitive balance across a set of 10 seasons. You can use the competitive balance ratio as well. You can use the Gini index, or you can use some of the measures of dominance, such as how many different teams have won a specific amount of championship, or how many what was the most number of times a single team has won the championship in a given period. And again, that research has been quite evident in papers of Dan Plumley Roberts and Girish Ramchandani and all of those others. But the focus of this research is just on the within season competitive balance, or the measures of win dispersion. So I will just take through some of the measures that a bit of a deep dive into some of the measures. So standard deviations of wins or points. So it's one of the commonly used indicator of competitive balance. Either you are variating the win percentages. So uh, when the first papers came along on competitive balance, when we were doing the analysis of competitive balance, I think it emerged from NBA or Major League Baseball. I don't exactly remember the sport, but it was by Nolan Scully in 1989 when those measures were popularized. And those leagues adopted 2 point for a win, and draws were usually non-existent in those leagues. So usually you could easily apply the standard deviation of win percentages on those leagues. And It has been hugely popular in US team sports. A version of the standard deviation of wins or points that was standardized by Owen in 2010. So he basically fixed the measure between 0 and 1, dividing it by the maximum possible standard deviation of any chosen league. And uh, for me, it makes sense to me if a measure is standardized between 0 and 1 because it gives me a sense of idea in terms of how much is existing or how much it has deviated. The other one is Gini inequality index. So it was first introduced by Schmidt and Berry in 2001 when they argued that you can compare wins to income distribution, and they basically introduced the Gini coefficient as a competitive balance measure for Major League Baseball. And it had similar problems with standard deviation of win percentages. So in theory, the Gini inequality percentage can go up to 1. But for a sports team, it is not possible because it is not possible for one team in the league to win all the games, not just that they play, but all the other teams play in the league. So the Gini index is also basically capped at a certain number of points, and you can calculate the normalized Gini by dividing the absolute Gini against the maximum Gini score for a chosen league. And I don't remember the exact value that is for the Premier League at this point in time. The third one is the Herfindahl Index of Competitive Balance. It's potentially one of the most common measures that's used to measure competitive balance across teams in European sports, predominantly football. And for a perfectly balanced league, they say the HICB has 100. So if all teams end up drawing all the games in a season, uh, it will produce a score of 100. But you can again normalize the measure between 0 and 1, capping it against the maximum possible competitive balance. And there have been some discussions recently by Trigaro Ruiz and Avila Kano around how the 310 point system and the 210 point system differs. And they did some papers on what is the maximum competitive balance or inequality using HICB measure in the Premier League or a league that uses 3 points for a win system. So that is again one of the purposes that we will investigate in this paper, whether that point system makes any difference to the competitive balance or not. There are other ways of measuring competitive balance as well. So relative entropy, which was used by Horowitz, the index of dissimilarity, which was introduced by Mizak and Steer in 2004, and also the competitive balance ratio, which was used by Humphreys in 2002. So the top two measures, they haven't been used in recent literature or not in the literature I found since 2010. So we have not used those measures in this study. And the competitive balance ratio by Humphreys 2002, uh, it is dependent on the identity of the teams, and it can be applied to North American leagues more appropriately than it can be applied to European leagues. And as such, I have not included that in the study. Moreover, it is it combines both concentration and dominance together if you apply it correctly. And my question there is, when I was a student, I loved so many measures. All of them said different things, and I think one of the main assumption is people think these measures are different, and I have fallen foul to some of them myself in some of the papers I have published, arguing that this is more appropriate than the other measure. But while I was going through my doctoral studies trying to construct a quantitative measure for something that I was doing, I was reading through how measures are constructed, and it is basically constructed by different institutions or groups of people to legitimize their viewpoints. And uh, I don't know, as scholars, I feel that we should question if all of those different measures are improving the literature or society, which in this case are the sport economists or people who are interpreting it in any shape or form. And I used this quote, which was by Gamistiller and Anagnosopoulos in a paper recently published in the European Sport Management Quarterly, where they said, as Carter and Spence put it, instead of asking what can society do to improve its knowledge, we should reverse the question and ask how can our knowledge improve society. And my question here is, does having too many measures, which is good to have, improves our knowledge, is it improving the society, which in this case is the professional sports leagues, or adding to the knowledge base in any shape or form. And to get there, we must challenge existing assumptions and question prevailing perspectives, in which this case, the prevailing perspectives is all these measures are different from each other. And probably the way forward goes through theory development that contributes to actionable and responsible knowledge, and hopefully through the research that we have done, hopefully some of that makes sense, and hopefully that solves some of the ambiguity around the different measures of wind dispersion that exist in competitive balance. So in terms of the research objective, the key question that we wanted to answer is, does it matter which competitive balance metric is used in empirical research? A bit of a background to how the question was formulated. It was actually formulated over a couple of beers. Uh, and it basically was, can we find out which measures justify to each of the different leagues separately? Uh, And while I was doing that, I was doing some of the other studies, and I was confiding some of the results with David, and David said you should rather investigate if all of them are same or all of them are the different things. And the first objective was to evaluate if the commonly used measures for competitive balance, in this case wind dispersion, are empirically distinct or are they overlapping with each other. And the second objective was to evaluate if the point system, so whether you are using a 210 point system to a 310 point system, makes any difference to the overall competitive balance of a league. So we had some inclusion criteria for leagues in sports when we tried to come up with this study. So we said that the leagues must operate in a balanced round robin system, which is quite the case with football. And we also said that they either operate in the open system or a closed system, not a hybrid format, where uh, you will see in some Asian countries that some of the leagues, some of the top division leagues currently are only open to promotion, but no relegation because they don't have enough number of teams. So we selected two leagues for this study for football and two for cricket. So the two leagues we selected for football are English Premier League, because England, and we selected the Singapore Premier League because it was one of the leagues that for which we were able to find 20 consistent years of data where they had a balanced schedule and the season was closed. And for cricket, we used the County Championship Division 1 in England, which is an open system, operates in the promotion and relegation with Division 2. And we also use the Sheffield Shield from Australia, which operates in a closed system. So there are just the 6 states. They play with each other over and over again every season. We didn't look at any of the determinants that determines the competitive balance. That's not the aim of the measure. The aim of the aim of this paper was to test solely whether the measures are empirically distinct from each other and whether point systems make any difference to them whatsoever. So we applied the 210 and 310 point systems to all the leagues as a part of this study. And for this period, for this study, we covered the time period of 2001, 2002 to 2020, 2021 for football, and 2000 to 2019 for the sport of cricket, which gave us 20 seasons worth of data. We would have loved to do 2021 to 2020 for cricket as well, but it was disrupted owing to COVID-19 pandemic. So no county championship was played in 2020. And the Sheffield Shield, the last two rounds of Sheffield Shield was also cancelled. So we couldn't had to use one season previously. So we use the three most used measures of wind dispersion that are within competitive balance for this study. So we used both the normalized variant of Herfindahl index of competitive balance and the distance measure, which was proposed by Avilagano and Tregario Ruiz. We used the Gini index, which both the normalized variant, and we created an Euclidean-like Gini measure just to see if a new measure is also similar to that. The answer is it is similar to the Gini measure. And we use the standard deviation of wind proportions or points as a normalized variance. And a detailed description of all of these papers and the ones that have not been included in the part of the study, you can find in one of the working papers of Richard Evans from 2014 in this Birkbeck online research paper series. Uh, and other measures, as I said, have not been included owing to their lack of usage or limitations of either being applicable only to closed leagues or open leagues. So we have used on these three measures, these were the most used. I think we analyzed close to 100 papers, some of them not peer reviewed as well, and most of them use a variant of either HICB Gini index or standard deviation across the last 10 to 15 years. So how do we test for constructing constructive distinctiveness? So the first one we did was a correlation analysis to identify the strength and direction of relationship between different measures. And then we also used discriminant validity analysis. So this was something which was, as I said, I thanked Dr. Sayan Gupta. They use these measures in psychology quite often, so we thought that might be translating here. So we use the Fornell-Lorker criterion where the square root of the average variance of each construct is compared to the correlations between that construct and the others. We use the heterotrait monotrait ratio, which compares the ratio of between construct correlations to within construct correlations. And we did a cross-loadings factor analysis where, where each indicator should load more strongly on its assigned construct than on other constructs. So I put on some of the results that we found. So in terms of the correlation tests from the football leagues, as you can see for both the English Premier League and for the Singapore League across the 210 point systems and 310 point systems, all of those measures are highly correlated with each other. And one of the things that we found was the standard deviation of win proportions in a 210 point system is exactly identical to the distance to competitive balance in a 210 point system. So you can see the uh, uh, correlation score is 1. And that was the same not just for English Premier League, that was the same for the Singapore Premier League as well. And that was same for the cricket leagues that we analyzed as well. And and all the measures were highly correlated with each other, all of them above 0.9. Uh, Suggesting a high degree of collinearity among the measures as well. So in terms of the findings just from the correlation analysis, across all four competitions, there were consistently strong statistically significant positive correlations and under both point systems. And we also saw that correlations across the point systems, it was highly correlated. So it suggested that the point, while we calculate competitive balance, the point system doesn't really have an impact. It might have an impact on the final result of the teams in terms of who might qualify for a continental place or not. But while calculating a competitive balance, it doesn't have any impact, specifically for the 210 and the 310 point systems. Again, we didn't evaluate any bonus points or anything that is being awarded as a part of the league because that was way too complicated for me at that point. We also use the Fornell-Larker criterion. So if you can see the Fornell-Larker matrix between each criterion, you will be able to see the average extracted variance between different constructs in the middle of the screen. So all of them range between either 0.08 to 0.11. Uh, Looking back at it, I should have done probably a better job in just circling them out, but they should be they should be higher than the respective correlations to basically be constructively distinct. And in this case, they are lower than that, which basically suggests that none of the measures are constructively distinct from each other. I am happy to share the open data set for anyone who wants to run the results to test this out. And in terms of the Fornell-Larker criterion, none of the diagonal values exceed the corresponding intervariable correlations, and a similar pattern is observed for all variables showing consistent overlap. Additionally, all the diagonal values for all measures in 210 system are also lower than its correlations for the corresponding measures in the 310 system. And this says that the CB measures are highly interrelated and fail to demonstrate discriminant validity as distinct constructs. So I said, okay, this might be one measure. It might pass another test. So we did the heterotrait monotrait ratio. So in the heterotrait monotrait ratio, so the diagonal values are always 0 because you are comparing them against each other. But while you are comparing them against different point systems, you would ideally want the ratio to be lower than 0.85 to make sure that they are constructively distinct, or if they are more than 0.85, you would want them below 0.9. That is a more liberal threshold used by psychologists at times. As you can see, none of the measures again, uh, they are all above the more liberal threshold of zero point 0.9 that we use as a part of this paper. None of them are below 0.85, and basically they fail to establish discriminant validity across different point systems. And what this suggests to me is potentially these variables might not be empirically distinct. So we see a number of papers doing determinants of competitive balance studies in these days. And my thought process is if all of these measures are used against them, used as dependent variable against those independent variables, they will potentially return similar or close enough R squared that the variables can't be distinguished among each other, which we might do just as a part of a future study to validate it out. The third one is the cross-loadings factor analysis. So it was basically just a principal component analysis to check how many factors they are loading onto, if they are showing any different factors. And as you can see, all of them just loaded onto a single factor, which was factor one. And while I started running it with Python, uh, for factor 2 to factor 10, the decimals were so large that it didn't record it. It just recorded them as zero. The values were very close to zero for factor 2 to factor 10. All of them almost loaded on to a single factor, and all of them loaded with more than a 0.95% loaded onto a single factor. So the number of extracted variables for this analysis was set to the number of variables to ensure a comprehensive view of the latent structure. So we had 10 measures, so we used 10 factors. And the exhibited loadings were greater than 0.95 for all measures of concentration on factor 1. And this unidimensional loading pattern indicates that the variables lack factorial independence and do not represent distinct underlying constructs. So my question is, are we should we have so many different measures? It's good to have different measures, but what's the point of having so many of them if all of them represent the same thing? Because if I go to the industry and try explaining different measures to the national governing bodies on why they should care about competitive balance, they will, and show them the body of literature, they will just go and say, there are too many, we are just confused, so we don't care. So we should probably just have one measure, and it doesn't matter which one we choose because all of them are similar to each other. And I don't know, I request to a reviewer too, potentially to stop picking on measures. And Zimbalist in 2002 said that the best CV measure is the one to which consumers show the greatest sensitivity. But using all of this, if we can't differentiate between the metrics, we don't know to which the consumers will show the greatest sensitivity. And this basically ensures that there is a lack of conceptual clarity, of which I have fallen foul to, and there is a lack of discriminant validity in academic research when it comes to measuring competitive balance. In conclusion, what I say is the reliance on multiple redundant competitive balance metrics without testing for distinctiveness may reflect a technical rationality bias, and with high empirical redundancy, I think the choice of metrics do not matter really. What matters is how we convey those results to the general audience rather than fighting over the metrics. Because since all of them are the same, they don't really matter. In terms of implications, some practical implications. So I think a couple of years ago, FIFA did some stuff around competitive balance, where they published a competitive balance for every country. And what they did was basically just checked for what are the dominant teams in a chosen country over a 10-year period. And they probably did it because fans easily understood that. So if we simplify the approaches, potentially it can reduce confusion among practitioners, media, and fans. I mean, of course, we want to take the field forward. We want to come up with new ways of doing things. But if people on whom these things have an actual impact are confused and are not able to interpret it and are not able to apply it in a real life setting, probably this doesn't have a value, according to me. And while understanding how different metrics from a very mathematical standpoint is important, uh, the specific choice of method is less important than previously thought, according to me. And um, as an educator, we should probably encourage critical assessment of assumptions, methods, and contexts to support epistemological reflexivity in academic development. So, potentially, just because I know how to do HICB, I shouldn't push my students to do HICB. They can do whatever they want, because if they choose to apply it correctly, all of them will say the same story. Uh, Thank you, and I am happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Sarthak. That was really very interesting. I am going to react to that with a team's round of applause. That was a really fascinating insight into the myriad competitive balance measures that do exist. And as you said at the start, we're going to have lots of time for Q&A. So there's loads of time now. So I'll open the floor to anyone who would like to ask any questions.
You can go with your question first, James.
Yeah, I can ask you a couple of questions. The first one was I saw you basically, I guess you calculated the league's tables yourself, and you used 2-1-0 and 3-1-0. I guess my question there really is that I know cricket in particular has a quite an extensively complicated system of bonus points for various bits and bobs, and those kinds of things surely matter.
Yeah,
Not
so
just in terms of calculating the table, but the way in which teams might go about matches to get wins, to get above other
yeah,
teams, and so on.
I actually did some work for industrial work for Leonard Curtis, investigating competitive balance on cricket, and we investigated separately a 3-1-0, a 2-1-0, and the bonus points. There was only one instance in which it actually changed the position of the teams.
That is quite interesting.
So that
Yeah.
was one instance in 20 seasons when it actually changed changed the placement of the teams, and that was the only instance when it actually impacted the promotion from Division 2 to Division 1. That was it.
And I guess the follow-up question is, and I'm not a cricket fan, so this is about the extent of my cricket knowledge, but a draw in cricket can be very different to a draw in football, right? Where two very different teams can end up drawing because the weather or something
Yeah.
like that. I don't know how that's reflected in point systems in cricket, and whether that has any kind of effect on
So
competitive balance measures.
in cricket, what they use, and again, different countries, as you rightly pointed out, they have very different systems. Some countries in cricket, when it ends in a draw, specifically in India, they have points for taking a lead in the first inning. So you get, I don't know, if it's a 6 point for a win, you will get 4 points if you have won the game on the basis of the first innings. Uh, Weather does play an impact, but mostly apart from England, anywhere else in the world, domestic cricket is organized when the weather is at its best, potentially reducing the number of rain disruptions. And most of the domestic cricket leagues, again, apart from England, they end up producing a result apart from draws more often than not.
Fair enough. Those are my first few questions. Sarah's put a question in the chat, which might be a
Yeah,
follow-up on the cricket discussion.
yeah,
So
yes,
the amount of points for draws changed over time in the county championship.
yeah. They changed it. I think when they started it, they had like 16 points for a win. They had 8 points for a draw and 0 for a loss. Then they changed it to something completely different, 16 for a win, 6 for a draw, 0 for a loss. Then they reverted back to it. Then they had in bonus points. Then they had points for scoring certain amount of runs over 200, 300. But as we said, when we investigated it, there was no impact whatsoever across the 20 seasons.
Questions and comments from the audience? Do you see scope for combining different measures? I mean, when they all seem very highly correlated from what you've found, is there scope for, combining measures, things like that?
I mean, just use whatever you want to use. Just don't tell people that this is better. And I think like people should be allowed the freedom to choose whatever suits them, rather than saying that this is the best, this is not. Hi, I think Stefan has a question. He raised his hand.
Go on, Stefan.
Yeah, hi, Sarthak. I guess I have a couple of observations, which is first, I just thinking about the way you presented this, I was very struck by the way you said that, academics think about these things, then they go to the teams, and then you have to persuade the teams or the leagues why this is interesting. And then when you've done that, they kind of might use this to improve the competition. And I think historically, I think that's just not the way it happened. Actually, the concept of competitive balance was not invented by academics. It was invented by the leagues, particularly Major League Baseball. They invented this concept in the 19th century, and they used it pretty significantly in the 1950s to evade antitrust. So in the 1950s, American Congress was reviewing baseball and challenging the labor market relations. And what happened was the leagues went into the hearings, into the congressional hearings, and said, "Hey, we need to have these restrictions because otherwise all the best players will end up with the biggest teams, and we won't have any fans, and that will destroy baseball." And it's only after that that economists try to quantify the notion of competitive balance and to see if it mattered, right? So I think, so firstly, I think that's the way around it. And then secondly, what happened then is, for all this research that you summarized, actually all the meta studies show there's very little influence of competitive balance one way or the other. It really doesn't make any difference to demand. So in some sense, this was all a fabrication by the leagues to persuade, to evade antitrust. And we, the academics, have kind of fell for it and have produced all of this literature, which has helped the leagues, but it's not actually helped anybody else. And so that's one observation. The second thing I would say is, in more recent times, I think this literature has progressed in a much more positive way, with people looking at things like suspense and surprise. And it seems to me that those concepts are much more readily grounded in what the fans are responding to. And they make much more sense. And clearly very unbalanced, very competitively unbalanced leagues like soccer leagues in Europe are actually have a lot of suspense and surprise, and that's why they remain popular, even though they're actually, by most of these competitive balance measures, they're going to come out less competitive balance than, say, baseball and so on.
Yeah, I completely agree with your point, Stefan. But my experience about the leagues telling me that they were confused is I tried taking it to the All India Football Federation, and they didn't understand a word of it. And they were like, "Can you quantify it for me between 0 to 1? Why should it matter?" I think the literature in recent years doing things around end of the game competitive balance, some things which have been done, new measures, that's a good progress. But again, this was like my attempt at showing like all of those measures are really the same. And I completely agree with your point on that. The leagues probably said that we are competitive and we should all those antitrust laws, and we fell for it.
When you were explaining this to the All India Federation, if it had been me, what I would have said to them is, "Hey, listen, this doesn't matter. These measures don't make any difference anyway. This isn't going to affect your fans. So, if they think that it matters, that's actually a mistake, because the evidence shows it doesn't make any difference."
I mean, it doesn't matter because I do support one of the teams in India, right? And I don't care what the competitive balance is, because I do want my team to win every single game and probably, I don't know, win all 24 games in a given season.
Oh, well. So that sounds like a different paper then. Oh, well, thanks anyway. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I mean, the discussion there reminds me of the discussion that's often had about, the within match level rather than the seasonal level. Where I totally agree with, what you just said. My background is this game back on the 1st of July, which was finished 3-2 after extra time, and it was horrendous. It was the most awful experience of my life watching that game unfold. I'd much rather have been 3-0 or 4-0 rather than this, incredibly tense battle, which might would have obviously, suited the neutral armchair fan watching the game, but it certainly didn't suit me as someone that's heavily involved.
I think so that when I would watch my team play against the rival, I don't want a 0-0 until the 89th minute. I would want it to be done and dusted 5-0 by 65th minute.
Exactly. I guess there still is that composition effect, isn't there, where you have, of any audience, presumably, or maybe it's just a spectrum, of every audience from one team to the other. There's the fans of each team that don't want uncertainty, but there's everyone in the middle that does want uncertainty.
Yeah, I think like there are some papers around that which I haven't included as a part, which is the optimum competitive balance in a chosen league, and there are factors around what's the optimum amount of home advantage, and I was trying to play around with some simulations of that, and it broke in the very first simulation when we tried.
Yeah, you're right, because there is that idealized scenario where it's as equal as it can be, isn't it? A league where the team that's at the top wins against the teams below, and each team loses the teams above, and wins against the teams below, whatever it is. And whether that's more interesting than a league where one team runs away with it.
Yeah.
Any more questions and comments from the audience?
It's summertime, it's evident.
There is that, certainly. It's a good turnout for the middle of summer. There's at peak there are 20 people in the audience, which is not a bad turnout for the middle of August. So I think it's more that you've presented a very complete presentation, and the conclusions I think are interesting and relevant, and you covered all bases. So thank you very much.
Thanks, James.
So yeah, we'll wrap up and say thank you, Sarthak. Thank you everyone who's contributed. A really interesting presentation on competitive balance. We are taking another week's break next week, another part of the summer to break. So no talk next week on the 8th of August, but we then return on the 15th of August for Dmitry Dagayev's talk on language segmentation of the online chess labour market. So wish you all a fantastic weekend, especially if you're watching the opening of the English football season, but not if you're Milton Keynes Dons fan. And see you all in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks very much, everyone.